Guess you ready there, Bruce?
Cucumber obstacle.
All right. Hello, my name is Franklin Hu, and the title of my talk here is called The Currency of Thought. So this is about a little bit related to artificial intelligence and its mythical goal of creating a self-conscious, sentient program, say like HAL in 2001. So we're talking about some kind of machine that we can interact and talk with that appears to think and communicate just like we do. That is the goal. But unfortunately, we're really nowhere able to do that. Furthermore, we don't even seem to have a plan for doing that. So what I hope to do is to introduce a way where we might be able to get there, where we might be able to understand enough about how we think to get a computer to do the same thing. And I will also try along the way explain why our current strategies are failing. So why did I call this the currency of thought? So I was thinking that we use money to exchange goods and services. So we use our language to exchange ideas. So basically, the language acts as the medium to exchange ideas, just like we use money to exchange goods and services. So I would say that it's a critical thing to have a language in order to think in a sentient manner. You know, I have this statement here that basically we would not be able to think if we didn't have a language. Now, my last time I gave this speech, I think a lot of people were confusing that completely with the ability to think, and were disagreeing with that. So let me make it clear that I'm not saying that all thought must be done with language. For example, you know, if you have a rat that can do a very complex maze, so you could consider that a kind of thinking, but that certainly doesn't require any language. Or we have just like our reflexes, or our heartbeat and things like that, which don't seem to require any language. So to make it clear, what I'm talking about is the kind of thinking that only people do. That when you sit there and you are sitting at the lunch table and you're looking at a menu and you're deciding what you want to eat, that is the kind of thinking that I'm talking about, where you can basically hear your sentient consciousness going on, right? So when you're sitting there at the table, you go, well, let's see here, they have salads, and they have soups, and they have burgers. What am I hungry for? What looks good? That as you're making that decision, I don't think you're making that decision kind of just like silently or subconsciously. You're going and thinking like, oh, well, I want to have a burger because I haven't had a burger in a long time. Or you're going, boy, that soup is expensive and I don't want to do that. Or, you know, or things like that. These kind of words and sentences go on in your mind. And these are not things that happens to anybody else in the animal kingdom. So our language not only separates us in the ability to actually speak and communicate, but it also actually enhances our actual ability to think. So, you know, one example of this would be like if you're an Eskimo, you might have 23 words for the word snow, versus us in English who have exactly one word for the word snow. So I would say that the Eskimo has actually a much better ability to express and manipulate and come up with different ideas about snow, because they have just so many more terms to deal with that. So I'm going to go into some of the details about how I think how words work, how sentences work, how we answer questions, and how we solve problems, which I think is some of the hallmarks of a sentient thinking type person. So how would we do that? So the first thing is to worry about is how do we represent words? So in conventional natural language processing, artificial intelligence, you take your words and you tag them in order to give them meaning. So you would give them their parts of speech, like if this is a verb or this is a noun, and you would tag them with a bunch of other things depending on what your application is. But this tagging tends to be exceedingly difficult to achieve, and it's just difficult to come up with the tagging, and it's very difficult to actually parse these things. So instead of doing that, let's just take a look at what our brain is. And if you've ever seen any pictures of, say, neurons, they don't seem very organized. There's just a cell, and then there's another cell, and there's a bunch of dendrons connecting them. And it doesn't seem to be anything really intelligent there. It's just a bunch of electrical signals attaching a bunch of nodes. So how can we use that to be able to help recognize things like words? So the way I think of it is that our senses, like our ears and our eyes, you know, if you look at the physiology, they're just a bundle of nerves that go from the eye or the ear, and they just terminate on some part of the brain. And I believe when you are born, you know, you are given a randomized network, and all that is just a bunch of nodes with a bunch of random connections in it, with varying amounts of resistance, just randomly. But when you hear something from your auditory sensors, like your ear, so you hear something like the word car, that just goes into that network, and by using the electrical path of least resistance, it just spreads out through this network, taking the least path of resistance. And the only property that the neuron needs, aside from electrical resistance, is that as you get the same auditory input, it takes the same path, and as it takes the same path, the resistance lowers, so that the more you use that connection, the lower the resistance goes. So the stronger that you will get the same path when you hear the word car. So you're not organizing it into any particular anything, any categorization. It's almost like a hashing function, where you get a certain input and it all maps to like a single number in your brain. So when you hear the word car, you can think of it just making a specific pattern of network discharges in your brain. Now the similar thing might happen when you see something. When you see something specific, like a car, that impacts our neural networks in a certain way. And the more that we see something that looks similar, then it goes through that same network. Now that's a little bit like the machine learning algorithms use, say, like pattern matching. So there may be like they've actually made an application which you take a picture of a hot dog and it says, yes, that's a hot dog, or no, there's a hot dog. So in some ways, you know, that part might be useful in order to just get this kind of recognition, because humans seem to be very good at this sort of recognition, where we see something similar, we know they are the same thing. Now, when we actually learn what a word is, what we're doing is we're tying the auditory with the visual networks together. So you can imagine there's the auditory network, there's a visual network. So when we are taught what the word car is, we are just burning a link between those two. So as soon as I hear the word car, it immediately lights up the visual network for car as well. So those two are immediately united. And like I used to show my kids these videos that did exactly that. They would like have the word train, they would say train, and they would show a picture of a train, so that it would imprint upon you this relationship between the auditory cues and the visual cues. And so that doesn't require any kind of complicated categorization. It's just one random network connected to another random network in order so that what we have is that anything that we associate with car can be connected in a similar manner, maybe the smell of the car, maybe the kind of cars you like, anything associated with the car just simply gets burned into and is connected to the auditory version of what you've initially heard as car. So this actually gives us an ability so that when I mention the word car, you actually have access to everything that you have ever remembered about cars, whatever it might happen to be. So, and that's a very, very important property for us to have in order to do language processing, which we basically get for free by nature of just these connected networks. And the more often we use something, the brighter, the lower resistance that will be. And so this gives us like context. So if I'm like talking to you about, say, my car, then basically all the networks that are involved with information involving my car, which may be a Honda Civic, would be lit up the brightest in your brain, right? So that when you think of car, you're more likely to hit information about my car versus your car. Okay, so how are sentences represented? So I believe sentences are also a type of network. Now this is a kind of a higher abstraction upon just the raw neural network that I'm talking about. But when we say a simple sentence like the car is blue, what it does is that burns a path between the word car and the word blue with an is-a relationship kind of thing. This is usually called like a thematic role kind of network. But whenever the word car is activated, electrically the electricity goes through and it will find blue. Those two are now connected. So when I say car, blue may also be lit up, depending on what the context is. So then we would have instantaneous access to car, its visual, and also this abstract relationship, which is that it's blue, right? And so the sentences just wind up being the links between these words, and basically no matter what language you're in, you see the same kind of network pop up. Like, I ask the difference, what's the difference between someone who learns a word in Spanish versus English? I would say that you have those two auditory cues, but basically they will all point to the same type of network that you're using to represent car. So the more complicated question is, how do we answer questions, given that we have words and these words make up these networks? So a simple question might be, what color is the car? So this question in your brain would light up the node color and car. Now the word color would be associated with the pathway for things like green, blue, orange. So when you were in kindergarten and you were learning your colors, you learned that the word color is associated with these other words, blue, green, red, and yellow, which is kind of an abstract idea. This is one of the things about language, is that it does allow us to have these handles for very abstract ideas, because color is not any one particular thing. It's like at least 7 different things for the standard colors that we all know about. But we know that car is associated with blue, because I just popped into your head the sentence, the car is blue. Now the way that works is that this is like filling a network with, say, imagine the nodes, each word as being a node connected by channels. And that when you ask the question, that's like pouring water into these channels, which flow using lowest resistance, which is exactly what the electricity does basically in our brain. It just seeks out the connections with the lowest resistance. And what happens is that when they reach each other, they reinforce each other, and they also brighten up the networks of anything that's connected to it. So what happens is that when I hit the word color and car, it will light up that bit where it says car is blue. And then, so basically the answer will light up just by virtue of you plugging in the question words. And that is basically how I'm saying how we answer questions, which is that we input the question words, and then we see what flows around and seeing whether we can find and actually build up the sentence that we're looking for. In this case, the car is blue is the answer. It's something that you would have retrieved because that sentence has already been imprinted into your mind. And it's the thing which is most in common with the question words which were presented to that network. So I have come up with a visualization here of how this might work. So here we have the word car, which you would hear from your ears. And this is totally random network. So there's no plan in here. It's just a bunch of connected squiggles. But I would say that, so when you hear car, it lights up this specific pattern that I have here in red, let's just say. So whenever you hear car, anything like it, it lights up that piece of the network. And when you see like this car here, it lights up, when you see anything like a car, it lights up this bit here in green. Similarly, when you hear the word blue, it would light up this bit in the network, and when you see the word color, it would light up, say, this bit here. Now, when we start adding sentences like the car is blue, it will start burning connections between these two random networks. It just finds the shortest path and burns a connection between those two. So I've showed these connections in blue. And so in the same way, we have the word color in blue. We have blue is a color. So that also burns a pathway in between those two. And we also have a pathway burned between the visual representation of a car and the auditory representation of a car. So when we ask, what color is the car? So we have electricity coming from this network, electricity coming from this network, and sitting right there in the middle is blue, which is the answer. So it's a matter of, I know that's grossly oversimplified, but in this talk, I just want to give you an inkling, a tip of the iceberg about just how our brain actually goes about resolving these questions. And it does it entirely by manipulating the English language, by having it in this kind of network fashion here. Now, we get on to the most difficult thing, which is how do we actually solve problems? Because there's a lot of questions for which there is no one right answer. For example, what color should I paint my car? Now, that doesn't have any one answer. That answer will vary from person to person. So how do we make that kind of logical decision? The way I feel we do that is that we do it by lining up a series of statements in the form of sentences that are non-contradictory. So for example, I will say, I will paint my car red. So in your mind, when you're making up this decision, when you're at the paint store, you'll decide, well, I will have that sentence. In your mind, you will consciously think, I will paint my car red. And then that decision will trigger a bunch of words, in particular the word red, and it will bring up everything you know about red. Perhaps it might bring up, my girlfriend hates the color red because she thinks only people having middle-age crises buy those kinds of cars, which would be a very negative thing. So I will paint my car red and my girlfriend hates red cars would be contradictory. Therefore, we do not see that as a solution. So then you'd have to propose something else. Let's say I will paint my car green, and that might trigger the fact that your mom likes green, so she'll be very pleased when you buy that green car. So that's a pleasing thing. So those two things are compatible, that I will paint my car green and my mom likes green. So therefore we don't see any contradictions, and we feel that a solution is found. But a lot of our problem, and once again, this is a very, very simple example of us solving a problem. But if you sit there and you think about the things that you do on a daily basis, like when you get up, you try to decide, okay, what am I first going to do? Just listen to yourself. What are you thinking? What are you doing? I think you will find that you are doing this kind of activity where you're basically just lining up sentences, you're looking for contradictions, you're looking for things which are pleasing versus things which have negative connotations. And you're doing all of this in words. And that is kind of the main point that I'm trying to get across here, especially to the artificial intelligence crowd, that if we really want to get to this mythical goal of having like a conscious, sentient computer, that one of its primary characteristics, if you do it right, will be that you will be able to observe its consciousness, that you would be able to hear it think, just like I'm speaking to you. When you ask it a question, it will be able to observe every little bit of the sentences or the networks that it is considering while it's making its decision. It wouldn't just be something where it's just like trying to take a weight of things, and the thing which has the greatest weight is the answer, which would be a very typical artificial intelligence type algorithm. Because I believe that these very complicated tasks can be achieved by using a network which is initially just populated by the input sentences. So we speak through English language. That's basically a serialization of this network. And that what happens is that when you hear that, you deserialize it right into the same network that I have in my brain. And the only way that can correctly work is if we have similar concepts in our brain to start with. So as dissident scientists, I know we may have problems in that deserialization process, such that we misunderstand each other, because what I mean by force, or some vague term like that, may be different than what I have, and you may misinterpret what I'm saying there. But it's kind of interesting to realize that as I am talking to you, I'm actually burning brand new connections into your brains. For example, you may not have never considered the two words currency and thought to ever go together. But I have now burned a new connection into your brain, such that if I asked you, well, what is thought like? You might say, it's like currency, maybe, right? Because that's something I planted into your brain when the question was asked about what language might be like. You might recall the speech, and you might recall the title of the speech, which is the currency of thought. And this is genuinely how we as people remember things and recall things. So no complicated representation or categorization or tagging or weighting or anything like that is required. It's just a matter of setting up this network where every single thing that you learn basically goes into these sentence-like structures, and then we will answer questions and solve problems based on those same networks. It's just whatever happens to be brightened up at the time. And your consciousness turns out to be just the brightest pathway that happens to be in your mind. Like, for example, when I'm doing this speech, you're directly hearing my consciousness. I can't think over my other thoughts here, or maybe I can a little bit, but it's extremely difficult. But what all you're hearing is the very topmost thing that happens to be on my mind. And as I speak, and when you ask me questions, you're going to brighten up different words, which I will then respond by basically dumping out another sentence that's in my neural network. And that's how conversation goes, is that someone will say something that will trigger something in someone else's mind to recall something about some other topic, and you will reply with that information, which then causes another cascade. So what this is, it's just a big electrical cascade of things going through your mind, just constantly brightening different areas of your knowledge base on just basically electrical path of least resistance, and you're just sitting there refreshing those memories, like in computer memory needs refreshed, and the more you use it, the brighter it becomes, and the more thoroughly it's remembered. And like I said, this is in stark contrast with our current artificial intelligence strategies, which I believe would be unable to come up with a sentient type self-conscious computing machine ever. They are not close. They are very, very far away. They're not even really trying. So I would suggest, and this is the main point of my theory, that we really have to start thinking about this kind of strategy where we directly manipulate the English language in order to have this conscious thinking process. So that will conclude my speech, and I will take questions now. Yes, Bob.
Okay, this may, I don't know how serious a question this is, but have you given any thought to how your thought controls your mouth?
How my thought controls my body?
Mouth.
How my thought controls my mouth? Yes, well, I thought that's the serialization process. That as I come up with my network, see, I have to think about my network and what I want to say to you. What happens to be brightest is that it comes out that I need to say certain words, and then I just basically have muscle memory, so that when I need to say the word memory, it just comes out. Now, there's certain things, the other thing that humans are really good at, which is not to be confused with this kind of intelligence, is just muscle memories. For example, when you learn how to type, initially you had to sit there and stare at the keyboard and go, H, F, but eventually you gain a muscle memory so that those kind of things just become automatic. Initially you might have had to think about it in words just to get things going, or like some people do Rubik's Cubes and they don't think about it at all, right? They just look at the colors on the thing, and immediately they have a muscle memory to do it. But initially, when they first saw the Rubik's Cube, they probably would have to say in their mind, okay, the red spot is over here, and if I move this, then I'll be able to get this lined up, and you would see that kind of complicated language. Yeah?
The study of language led to the development.
Could we have you on the microphone, please? And also, we need people to give their names ahead of their people on the YouTube side are asking them for people to give their names first and then use the microphone. Thank you.
Bill Lucas. The study of language was used to develop what we call set theory. And the decisions in set theory are based on the use of logic. And so it looks like there's a relationship there. But also, you've probably heard the phrase, a picture is worth 10,000 words. Mm-hmm. And basically, we can convey information in a picture. And logic can be applied to the picture to confirm various aspects of the picture. So in science, we do a lot with what we would call a model, which is a picture. And so we have a picture, like the Bohr atom was a picture of the atom. And then over time we realized, oh, well, some of that was not very logically correct. And so, because we also had rules in electrodynamics and other fields that told us things that should occur or should not occur, and they doesn't agree with what we observe. So I think in science we still have to use this set theory and logic and in pictures. So I think that we need to concentrate on that, because many times we don't have a very clear picture of what we want to say or do or use for a scientific theory. And so we need to have something that can be understood by other people's language and set theory and logic in their mind. And so that's where we are. And the Greeks identified what logic was, inductive and deductive type logic and that sort of thing. And we need to learn how to use that. That has been discarded from modern science because it falsified all of the modern scientific theories.
Well, I don't know about set theory, but certainly our visual abilities are part of our thinking abilities. And once again, I want to emphasize that this speech is not about so much what are all the possible thinking modes. The thinking mode that I am trying to push here is that of the sentient, thinking, conscious machine. And being able to do like, I'm a highly visual thinker. And when I'm thinking about those things, I am using pictures and words. When I look at something, like if I'm trying to figure out what to visualize the B field of a magnetic field, I picture it in my mind, and I turn it over, and I'm using words going, does that work? Does the force really do that? Sometimes I literally have to put out a picture to see what's going on.
Well, my son has a Tesla car,
Yeah.
the Extravaganza, and
Okay.
it has to look at pictures and words that you said to it and logic to determine how to get from where you are to where you want to go. And it automatically drives your car, takes into account all the traffic conditions, policemen, stoplights, speed limits, all that kind of stuff. And it does it.
Yeah, it does it. Okay, another question then. Yes, Mr.
Yes. Would you say that?
I need your name first, please.
Musa Abdullahi. Would you say that people who are multilingual are better thinkers than just a person?
I wouldn't say that in general. I mean, not unless their language enables them to think in more different ways. For example, as computer scientists, people always say like we have a language of our own, and we do. And we are able to think about, algorithmically, like if I say the word stack, you might, if you're not a computer programmer, you may not know about that. But because I know about the word stack and how to manipulate it, does that make me smarter? Maybe. But in general, I wouldn't say that multilingual would give you any particular advantage.
But when you talk of language here, are you referring to a written language or not necessarily? Are you referring to a written language?
Not strictly. Written language is like human natural language and everything which is associated. So that would include written language, but obviously you could have a language which is not written. So it's not a requirement.
Any other questions? Okay, hand up, there you go. Push the button up there, we got one more.
Do we have any questions from the internet?
I did check. What is your programs for AI being comparable to humans and then even surpass human brain mind intelligence? What is your prognosis for AI being comparable or even better?
Well,
That was Pal to CJ.
the current prognosis, given the current algorithms in use, would be utterly hopeless. That I would predict that given the current state, 1,000 years will pass before we come up with an intelligent computer, because no one is actually, I believe, working in the right direction to get there. We have things like machine learning, and they can come up with apps that can recognize a hot dog or not, but the things that you can do with that kind of technology are highly limited. In my system, that is only the very, very beginning of the recognition system to get to a cognizant being that has a consciousness that decides things consciously. So, but if we were to adopt what I'm trying to propose here, I think progress could be very rapid. I mean, if someone gave me the money to go off and do this instead of me having to do my regular job, then I could probably achieve something that looks like a conscious computing machine in probably under a year, maybe only a few months. Yes, Bill.
Bill, Lucas, the Tesla car that has artificial intelligence that controls the driving is more successful than human intelligence because the accident rate is 1/10.
Yes, and that's a different kind of intelligence. I'm not saying that artificial intelligence is not useful. For example, we can easily have a chess program which is much better than most humans. But the question is, how does a chess program in artificial intelligence work? It goes and looks forward, 1,000 moves, every possible move that anybody goes. But a human can do the same thing, but a human, probably, especially if you're like me and you're just learning, you go and you reason it out using words. You say things like, well, I'm going to move my pawn in the front, and if I do that, then my opponent is probably going to move his rook. And I'm trying to expose his queen, so maybe if I do that, maybe he'll be tricked to move it out. And this is the kind of stuff that we would do as humans to solve a chess game or to do driving. That kind of thing is, that's like a very, very large contrast in what I'm suggesting.
Okay, we have a question from over here. Name, please.
Duncan Shaw, not a question, but an observation of thanks for this paper. It's stuff like this that makes it very much worthwhile to come to sessions like we are having here. It obviously is a developing area of science, and we have a long ways to go. But thank you for having explored this as far as you have. It's been fascinating.
All right, well, thank you very much. And that's why I come up, I present this in the hopes that someone hearing this might be able to, it would resonate with somebody, someone who might actually be able to do something about this, or maybe to just get me off my lazy ass and just go ahead and implement this thing. So maybe that will happen.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much.